And I want to say, just for myself, one way or the other, I'm proud of you, Madison. Thank you. And I appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, it's good to see you all. Thank you guys for putting this event together. It is the honor of my life to get to be your congressman. In about the 400 days I've been in Washington, I figured out what DC stands for. It's District of Criminals. And I will tell you, I used to be heavily libertarian when I got to Washington, or going through the election. But once I got to Washington, I really had this belief, we'll do whatever you want so long as it doesn't hurt other people, or hurt them or their property. But then when I met our adversaries, when I met the people that I have to call my colleagues, I realized that these people will completely take advantage of that laissez-faire form of domestic policy. If you start looking into what's going on in Washington, D.C., these people are ruthless. They do not sleep. They do not back down. They completely stay together. Their messaging is always on point. They have perfect message discipline. And it is truly incredible to see their level of commitment to this false ideology and their false god of big government and statism. And I will tell you, when I met them and then I started realizing, wow, we really need to get organized here. The Republican Party can't just continue to play defense, because if we continue to take a knee every time the mainstream media writes a bad article about us, or every single time that they try to advance on our positions, well, then we'll have what's happened in the last 6 decades. Since the 1960s, we've gone from the greatest country in the entire world to being a pseudo-welfare state, where we have 3-letter agencies, the fourth branch of government, that are now running everything into the ground. And so I'll tell you, I realize that I am sometimes a little forceful, a little aggressive, and a little brash for some people's likings. And some people have characterized me as being extreme with my beliefs. But I will tell you, I believe that we live in extreme times. I genuinely believe that if we continue to just play politics as usual, pleated pants and tasseled loafers and just playing genteel politics, saying, oh, we're going to get things all back together, then we will lose this country. The republic is on the line, people. And I'm telling you, when I see the future that they have built out for us, what they want to do to this country, they want to rip away our founding values. They want to take everything that we hold dear in this country, that we want to pass on to the next generation, whether it's the ability to have self-defense, whether it's the ability to have free speech or freedom of assembly, whether it's all of our beautiful Constitution. They want to take that from us. And I am so sick and tired of hearing about the Republican Party quoting Romans in Romans, saying, well, you're supposed to submit to authority. And you're supposed to submit to the governing bodies that are placed over you. Well, what are the first 3 words to the preamble of the Constitution?
We the people.
We the people. That is the governing body of this country. We have entered into a social contract with our government that they govern only with the consent of the governed. And so I genuinely believe that it is a biblical principle that when the government is no longer working for the welfare of the people, it is no longer working for the common good, then you have every right to have a little civil disobedience. You have every right to demand accountability from that government.
That's right.
And I will tell you, I saw Fauci is now come out of hiding. I think he was on MSNBC a few days ago. And he was saying, well, we might need to start ramping COVID restrictions back up as cases are on the rise. And it's no lie, cases are on the rise. I'm sure all of us have known someone that's died from COVID. But I'll tell you, their way of trying to fix this disease, this virus, it's completely asinine. I mean, we should be focusing on the remedies that we know that actually work. We should be trying to get monoclonal antibodies to every single person that needs it, not forcing people to get on ventilators. And when we see what's going on with our government, we see that when Obamacare couldn't even launch a proper website. When we see that they've now come out with multiple studies that lockdowns had 0 effect on the spread and transmission of COVID. When we see that they cannot even manage a budget whatsoever when we're the greatest country the world's ever known. Well, I realize that our government is broken. I'm telling you, I serve in Washington, and when I see the things that they are debating, the things they're arguing about, so often I just feel like it's just the symphony that's just playing music on the Titanic while the boat is sinking. And so when I hear people say, oh, well, you shouldn't rock the boat too much. The boat is sinking, people. We need a new plan. We need to go on offense. That's why we created the new contract with America. And, I have a lot of zeal. I have a lot of charisma. I've got a lot of aggression, and I never back down. I'm happy to take those things on. But I realize at 26 years old, I don't have a whole lot of wisdom at this age of my life. So I was very happy to get to team up with Speaker Newt Gingrich and have him get to help me work on this and tell me about some of the landmines that he had when he was launching their new contract with America in 1994. And I'm telling you, I think that this new contract with America, we have dozens, I think it's almost close to 40 candidates all across the country that are running, who've signed this pledge saying that we will push forward and introduce all this legislation onto the House floor. And I've got to give Bruce O'Connell some credit here. It was his idea to have the contract, and it was great. Really strong idea. But I will tell you, this new contract with America, it pushes forward this. And I hear candidates all across the country who are running on this ideology of America first or make America great again. But that ideology has not really been fledged out. And so we worked with a lot of think tanks, we worked with a lot of groups, and we have 53 policy objectives that I think would completely right the ship. One of which is the one I'm most excited about, is putting term limits on bureaucrats and term limits on members of Congress. Number 2 is cutting our government by a third, because I think when you looked at the Grace Commission that Ronald Reagan put out saying that about 1/3 of all government spending is wasted. I think that if we started to scale back the amount of our government, I think the American people would flourish. If we started removing these regulations that are strangling the American people, I think that our economy and our domestic policy would absolutely flourish. It would lift everybody up. And while we're talking about domestic policy, the reason I focus on it so much is because I believe that a strong domestic policy, a strong economy, is what creates strong foreign policy. When you're looking at right now with Russia having this immoral invasion of Ukraine, you realize that the only reason they're capable of doing this is because we've ceded all energy production to the rest of the world. Joe Biden literally campaigned on the idea that he was going to shut down the Keystone XL pipeline, that he was going to grant no new federal leases, that he was going to crack down on any kind of funding for any oil companies. And you see exactly what's going on. We're paying over $4 a gallon for gas here in Western North Carolina. When you start looking at OPEC nations, they're paying 25 cents a gallon. You look at Russia, they're paying $1.20 a gallon. You look at all these nations all around the world who are paying much cheaper prices, so therefore they can produce things at a much cheaper rate. Therefore, our sanctions start to mean very little. And when you start seeing that we're starting to lose our place as the reserve currency of the world, well, my friends, that's why Russia's not afraid of any sanctions that we're going to put on them. Because for the very first time since 1970, Saudi Arabia, who's no longer returning America's phone calls, has not returned Joe Biden's call for over 3 weeks, has sold a barrel of oil for the very first time since 1970, not using the U.S. dollar, but using the Chinese yuan. They've been preparing this for decades. They've created this One Belt, One Road initiative, which is really, think of it as an amazing feat of infrastructure all across Asia. And they've created a deal with Vladimir Putin that he will supply all of the oil necessary to make that One Belt, One Road initiative actually work. We are about to lose our place as the preeminent dominant force on the planet. And if we lose our ability to use soft power and use our economy and use sanctions to stop people, then our only other option then is to use the military, which means that our sons and daughters will have to go and die. And that is something that we should all be completely opposed to. And so I think that it is just so asinine that we are shutting down our economy just so that we can try and usher in this Green New Deal initiative to try and get away from fossil fuels. Which is so ridiculous because, you look at the soles of your shoes, they're made with fossil fuels. You look at your iPhones, they're made with fossil fuels. You look at glasses, they're made with fossil fuels. Sheetrock, made with fossil fuels. It's not just the oil you put in your car, it's the heavy crude, it's the liquid natural gas. It's what makes our entire economy run. And free economies are clean economies. If you give the power back to the people, heck, I'm a steward of the earth. I'm called to be one in Genesis. I grew up in the mountains of Western North Carolina. Of course I want to have a good economy. But I think a good environment. But I think the way that you have a terrible environment is you let the central planners in Washington, D.C. start meddling in our affairs. And that is what I'm trying to fix. I want to rip all of the power away from Washington, D.C., where they are basically focused on foreign policy. They are both focused on foreign trade deals, so we have a dominant trade across the world, and they are focused on infrastructure. Aside from that, stay the hell out of our lives. The federal government has grown way too far in its reach. And, I was starting to think about a lot of the best stories in all of history, and especially these days. You look at any of the Marvel movies, or any of the DC movies, any of the Star Wars movies, and the backstories to most of these heroes and villains are actually very similar. You'll see that a lot of these storybook writers, they'll put a scar on the face of a villain. I think of the James Bond villain. And almost every single one of the heroes in these stories, they're orphans, or they're orphaned in some fashion. And so they both clearly had a traumatic and a violent and a bad backstory. But the difference is how we respond to that pain. And I think that's where America is right now. We have had our rights violated. We have had our liberty taken away from us. We have had the boot of government pressing down on our ability to enjoy a free market. And I think right now, the thing that is so special about America is that when we feel this intolerance, when we feel this level of government overreach, when we feel the pain that they're inflicting upon us, Europeans, they just kind of lean back, and that's Australians, they just kind of lean back. Canadians, they just kind of lean back, and that's why you see them having stormtroopers in the streets going and forcing these tyrannical COVID mandates, because they lost their Second Amendment rights. They lost their ability to have freedom of assembly. But then their big bet, the elitists in Washington, D.C., their big bet to stop the momentum of this America First movement and this re-emergent Make America Great Again movement, their big bet was to call moms and dads who went to speak at school board meetings domestic terrorists, because they thought that would scare everybody away from trying to go out and speak out against the government. But what did the Americans do? The exact opposite of what the Europeans, the Australians, and the Canadians did. When you try and take our liberty, when you try and lean into us, Americans just lean in harder. We said, oh, you bet we're going to show up to the school board meeting still. Oh, you want to come and take our rights away? We are going to out-debate you. We are going to outthink you. We will outperform you on every single front until you realize that the government works for the people. And until they realize that, we will continue hammering them endlessly. And that is what I love about this country, is that no matter how hard of the difficulties that we face, we always rise up better. We always rise up ready to take on the challenge. And that is why I'm honored to get to be the congressman from Western North Carolina. Because when I think of the mountain people around this area, my gosh, we are so rugged and individualistic. We're so love the idea of being able to live upon your own means and independence and being self-reliant, not having to need a handout or the government to come take care of you. Because that's what it means to be an American. I sense so much of this generation of exactly what I think when we read about what happened in the 1750s, 1760s, and 1770s in our history, of how these people were tired of tyranny and how they rose up to shrug it off. And I think we have this incredible moment in American history right now where we have an opportunity to take our country back. If we put the right people in Washington, D.C. who are going to hold people accountable, who are going to investigate Anthony Fauci for lying to Congress and put him in jail, who are going to impeach Joe Biden for disregarding direct orders from the Supreme Court when he had an unconstitutional mandate, who are going to start firing bureaucrats, well, then the government's going to realize that they work for us. Because what good is an employee if you can't fire them? They'll never try and give their best effort. Then once they realize that they can kind of do whatever they want and they might be moved to a different agency, but they'll be at the exact same pay scale, well, then they're going to stop trying and they're not going to be pushing as hard as they can. And that is exactly what we're seeing in Washington, D.C. today. So anyways, it is the honor of my life to be your congressman. Every single time the mainstream media attacks me, well, I just take that as the fact that I'm doing my job, because they're terrified of what we're going to do to their movement. They have it made very well in Washington, D.C. They have their security guards. They live behind red velvet ropes. They live behind their 2-foot bulletproof glass. They never have to get around the dirty Americans at Walmart, as I think one of the Biden secretaries said. Well, my friends, I love being derided and hated in Washington, D.C., as long as I'm loved in the rest of America. Because I work for the people, not for the elites in Washington, D.C. Yeah. But anyways, I want to open up the floor. Does anybody have any questions that I can answer?
We'll take a couple of questions. Anyone
have
a question?
That sounds good.
Well, I have one.
Yes, sir.
I would like, if you would please explain to us who exactly, for everyone in this room to know, who the people are who are trying to keep you off the ballot.
Yes, so there were 11, District 11 constituents who filed a suit to try and keep me off of the ballot. According to the 14th Amendment, which was created after the Civil War, which says that anybody who partakes in insurrection cannot hold federal office. And so obviously, they came after me because I'm really loud and I like calling them out and holding them accountable for these things. But their end goal was to make sure that Donald Trump would never be able to run for president again, because apparently we spurred on an insurrection, which is absolutely ridiculous, as not a single person has been charged with insurrection. And so there were these 11 residents of our district who filed this charge with the North Carolina Board of Elections. But don't really think of it. Their names don't matter that much. The person that you need to realize who is the real architect of this is the exact same person who really developed the ballot harvesting and the mail-in ballot system that they used in the 2020 election. And his name is Mark Elias. Mark Elias participates in something called lawfare, which is basically weaponizing the judicial system against your political enemies. And so he launched this effort to try and make sure that Donald Trump would never be able to run here, that I would be kicked out of Congress, and that dozens of America First conservatives around the country would not be able to run for office. And so I will tell you, we filed a counterpunch lawsuit in federal court, and we had such a strong ruling in that lawsuit that we have set a legal precedent across the country that many congressmen who are having this attacked against them right now will be able to use this as a tool to say, hey, that's completely unconstitutional, it's completely wrong. And so the judge, really, when he was giving his ruling, he basically said that these lawyers who brought this suit against me, they should be disbarred, and that they now will have to cover our legal fees, which is really, really exciting. So it's great for the American First movement. Yes, sir.
I got a question. When the new Congress sets, which we hope it's going to be a Republican-controlled Congress, what are we going to see in the end results? Let's say the first 100 days.
In the first 100 days, I think it's very likely that Kevin McCarthy will be Speaker of the House. That's incredibly likely. And really, I think the biggest thing where they were going to be focusing on is just removing a lot of the regulations we see that are coming from Washington, D.C. against business owners. That will be number one. Number two is going to be just really trying to revamp the Department of Education. Number three is they're going to be putting a lot of oversight on a lot of the spending that the Biden administration has done, because there is a lot of unaccounted for cash in the Biden administration. And nobody's really talking about that, which is unfortunate. But I think that you're going to start seeing a lot of things that are going to make the American taxpayers really kind of scratch their chin and say, where exactly is that money being spent? And I think a lot of this money is being funneled to the unions and the teachers' unions to try and buy themselves votes. So I think that's going to be something very interesting. Another thing I want to touch on, and moving away from your question, sir, I know you have one in the back, but I want to talk to you about Ketanji Brown Jackson, the judge who has been the nominee for the Supreme Court. Yeah, that is a great response. So this judge was selected solely because of her melanin content and the setup of her chromosomes, because she was an African American woman. I mean, Biden very plainly said it, that was the criteria for what they were searching for. And so, one, I really detest that kind of criteria because it seems overly racist to me. I think that's obvious to just about everybody. But two, now that we're starting to see, and Josh Hawley's really leading the charge on this, Rand Paul and Ted Cruz are both on the Judiciary Committee and the Senate as well, so I'm excited to get their teeth into this whole issue. But you're seeing Josh Hawley bring up some very important questions which are going to make it very hard for moderate people like Mark Kelly, a few other senators, for the kind of the moderate Democrats who are in the purple seats, to be able to defend why they voted to approve this woman going onto the Supreme Court. Because there is a habit of this judge to be very, very soft and give very lenient sentencing to pedophiles, to child sex criminals. I mean, it's absolutely awful. And I think in her testimony yesterday, she was saying that, oh, well, he just had sexual contact with one of his peers, and so that's the reason we only gave him three months in jail, because it was one of his peers. It was an 18-year-old with an 8-year-old. I don't see much of them being on the same level playing field whatsoever. And so there is some real problems with this particular person.
Should be stopped?
It's a 50-50 Congress, so it's not a for sure bet, but unfortunately, Mitt Romney has already signaled that he will be voting yes. But Mark Kelly is going to have a very hard race in Arizona against a gentleman named Blake Masters, a guy I've endorsed, who's an incredible Senate candidate. He's one of the best thought leaders I've seen in my entire generation, so I'm very excited to see what he could do in the Senate. But Mark Kelly will have a very hard time defending why he voted to confirm someone who likes to give very lenient charges to child sex criminals. And so I don't think it's a slam dunk. What looked like was going to be a boon for Democrats in this election to be able to run around saying, oh, we got the very first African-American female on the Supreme Court bench. It's incredible. Now it's turned into a whole thing where people are having to start to think about their general elections coming up in November in the Senate to say, how am I going to defend the fact that I think someone only needs to serve 3 months if they rape a child in jail? And so it's very sad. This person's also said that they would like to remove the child sex offender registry because she thinks it creates a stigmatism around these people. Oh, no. Are you kidding me? I mean,
that's what you want.
It is. It's vile and it's evil. It really is. And sir, you had a question in the back?
Yeah, is it regarding your countersuit on the insurrection accusations? My question was it, I'm sure it's being appealed. That's almost an assumption it's being appealed. How far is that going to have to go before it's settled?
I believe it will. I believe that it's going to be thrown out by the next court. That they've already kind of leaned towards that. Number one, they dismissed the request to have an expedited case, and so that basically means that they're not worried about it whatsoever. If they actually wanted to rule on this and against me, then they would want to make sure that they had this ruling done prior to the primary coming up on May 17th. Yes, sir.
What is available that we can get rid of judges that are writing the law? I think back about Abraham Lincoln. I think one time he arrested a judge. So there may be some precedent set there. Is anybody on your staff looking at that, or is there anything we can do?
So we did look into it. For the Supreme Court, there's not a significant amount you can do against the Supreme Court justice. I don't know how it works with North Carolina state courts and what our Constitution dictates, but there is actually something in our Constitution where the House of Representatives can impeach federal judges.
That's what I wanted to know.
Not Supreme Court judges, but federal judges.
That's done.
So,
I'll send the information. I want to get the details.
I would love that. Yes, sir. Yes.
Some of your counterparts in the Republican Party, your primary opponents, have said that you spend too much time on Fox News. How do you, and they say you're not doing a job back home. How do you respond to that, to your fellow Republicans?
Yeah, well, number one, I think almost all of those claims are absolutely baseless. And we were the very first freshman member of Congress to have all 5 of our constituent offices open. They're still open to this day. We have closed more cases than almost any other freshman in Congress. We've closed over 1,600 cases in 400 days. We brought over $74 million in grants back to Western North Carolina. We recovered over $3 million from the IRS for our constituents who had it wrongfully taken from them because taxation is theft. And aside from that, we were the only member of Congress, freshman member, actually there was one other. We were the only freshman member of Congress to actually have all of our academy nominations done in the very first year of us being in office. And so I've got Hal Weatherman and Brianna McMinn right here. They lead my district offices and they do an incredible job. And so we have incredible public servants in this district who are doing a great job for you. But that's the people who say that I spend too much time on Fox News. I don't really understand that because if you look at the numbers of America, my generation is not really trending in the direction of being conservative, if you haven't noticed. You look at on the college campuses, you look at what's going on, and these people who attack me for it, because I made it a rule that I spend about 10% of my time traveling around the country. And we get hit on it, that I spent 10% of my time either outside of Washington, D.C. or outside of Western North Carolina. But it's to go around to conferences to speak primarily to young people, because I can speak their language, and to try and create an army in my generation of conservative thought leaders who are going to save this country from the Marxist revolution that is happening. I mean, you see what's going on college campuses, and I know when I first started seeing what was going on college campuses was, when I was in middle school, you started seeing all the real radical stuff on the news. I remember just thinking, wow, those college kids are crazy. I remember talking to my older brother, Zach, your generation's insane. I can't believe any of that. And then we got AOC in Congress, and then we got 4 more members of the next Congress and members of the squad. And so what's going on in our culture, Congress is downstream from our culture. So what's going on in our culture is really problematic. And so my friend Charlie Kirk and I, we have a goal to try and quadruple the size of the homeschooling population by the year 2035, which I think is very doable. It's already increased in size by 3 times. Since 2020, because what's going on in our government schools right now, and I'm not calling them public schools, we're calling them government schools, and we have a lot of incredible public school teachers. But what is being passed down from the Federal Department of Education is really worrisome, and it's creating a lot of problems. And so, my hit back on that is we're dominating here in our district. We really prioritize what's going on for our constituents, but also it is part of my mandate to be sent to Washington to go on offense to create an army for the next generation. And I see the great Pratik Baksha in the back. What's up, sir?
Hey, Madison, how are you?
Doing well.
In light of what's going on in Ukraine, apparently we're spending money defending somebody else's border than our own. How much, talk about the impact that these illegal immigrants are being distributed across the nation and how that's impacting our economy here. We're already struggling with high inflation, and who's taking care of these illegal immigrants? Is it the federal government when they're here in America?
Yeah, so the American taxpayer is footing a lot of the bill. We introduced a no-fly bill because when I went down to McAllen, Texas with the congressional delegation to see what was going on the southern border, I was having trouble getting back to Washington for votes because apparently all the flights were full. And so anyways, finally got a flight later at night, got on the plane, and I remember calling my scheduler and saying, I don't understand what the problem is here. There's like 60 seats open on this plane, and the plane probably seats 300. And so, he was like, I don't know, all the flights have been booked. I mean, there's only 2 more seats left on this one. I don't actually understand it. But then, once really kind of the boarding doors starting to shut, all of a sudden, a lot of people coming who had just crossed our southern border then started to board the plane. They all had a large manila envelope with one city, whether it was Boston, Chattanooga, whether it was Knoxville, written in big letters on it, and then they had all the documents they would need once they landed there. And where they're distributed after that, I'm not sure. I've heard from some of our law enforcement agencies that there are bus loads of illegal immigrants being unloaded in Edneyville and Henderson County. And so the problem is with that, and I was not by any means just looking at these people's, the way they look and saying, oh, well, you just crossed our southern border. But there's actually this really cute little girl who's probably about one age of my niece, I think she was about 6 years old, and a young mother that was with her. They sat right beside me. And the mother spoke just enough English for us to talk. And she said that, just a couple weeks ago, they had just crossed the southern border. And then they were held at a detention facility, which is now turned into a welcoming party. And they're put on a plane and flown into inter-America. And so the real problem with what's going on with that is, the illegal immigration is a huge problem for our economy as a whole, because as I said, in the last 6 decades, we've created a welfare state. And so the problem with that is that once all these people, because I believe in 2024, they will run on a platform of legalizing all these illegal immigrants. You already saw in New York, and I believe one other city, that illegal immigrants now have the right to vote in our elections, which I think is just absolutely insane. And so if they all become citizens, it will destroy our economic system, because we're going to have so much that we owe them through the form of welfare. And then you're going to see AOC standing up on top of marble steps saying, look, I told you capitalism would fail. We need to usher in socialism right now. We need to seize the means of production and give it to the government. Now, this is the same party that says never trust a politician, but give all of our production over to the government. It's insane. But another thing about actually sending money to help Ukraine, at first I was concerned about sending weaponry to Ukraine, just because I was concerned it might actually make the conflict worse, and they might start blaming Americans for dead Russians. But then I started thinking about it in the historical perspective, and the Russians have been arming our enemies for decades. I mean, they truly have. I mean, you ask anybody who served in the Middle East in this last 20 years, you ask them, what is the primary weapon of our enemy? They will say, the AK-47, of course, the Kalashnikov, which is made in Russia, which is made in Eastern Europe, which is being supplied to them from the Russians. RPGs, a lot of the weapons that our men have been maimed with and killed with was supplied by the Russian government to be able to be fought with via a proxy war. And so, I now really but that never escalated the war. You never saw any of our leaders saying, oh, well, that means that we need to go execute air raids against Russia right away. And so I really am a big fan of supplying them with all the Stinger missiles they need, all the humanitarian aid they need on the Polish side. But also I believe that what does that signal to the American people to be spending more money overseas than we are here in our own country? When we have veterans on the sides of the road who are homeless, when we have a porous southern border, and tens of thousands of people, I believe, have already died in Ukraine already, which is a tragedy. But you start looking at what's going on our southern border, that 100,000 people under the age of 40 in this year have died from fentanyl overdoses, which is made in China, brought into our country through our southern border. Well, then you start realizing that we've got some real problems. When you realize that I represent the most depressed, drug-addicted, alcohol-addicted, medicated, and suicidal generation this country has ever had, I wonder, if we're going to be spending that much money overseas, why are we not spending that kind of money on taking care of the mental health of our children and our young people? And so, I believe that, I'm all for helping the Ukrainian people who are being immorally invaded. I think we should supply them with weapons, but we really need to focus on American prosperity. Because if we get our prosperity under control, we establish ourselves as the preeminent, dominant world reserve currency, then all of a sudden our sanctions start meaning a whole lot more. And I'll just take 2 more questions that we got time.
Go ahead.
Mr. Nesbitt.
Madison, when we Republicans give to a campaign, we give our money, or we'll give it to the Republican Party, or we'll give it to the Trump's organization he's got going on. But the Democrats, from what we've seen, and in our reporting, we've seen where our taxpaying money goes to liberal organizations like liberal nonprofits in the form of grants. Besides voting these Democrats out, what's the best way that the federal government can step in and say, no, you can't do that?
I think that's a wonderful question. So we actually just, in the education committee that I sit on, we just introduced an amendment to not allow these very heavily left-leaning organizations that do after-school activities to not be able to register their students' parents to vote. Because I don't think that any federal agency needs to be out there, registering people to vote on the federal side. That's a state issue. It's very clear, I believe, in Article 3 of the Constitution that the states have complete purview over elections, which is the way it should be. Otherwise, Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden would be running every single election in the country. But I think the best way to do it is, again, I think we need to create a BRAC-style commission when we take command that really starts looking at where all this government spending is going wrong and where it's being spent woefully, where it could be better utilized, and then cut our government spending by a third. And I think the best place we could do in that is starting to look at a lot of these grants that are going to aid, which are pseudo-political.
And your local party needs to start doing that on the local level, because that's where you really start hurting.
I'm telling you, though, what's going on the local level, in Buncombe County, we have so many problems, y'all. It is so sad what has happened. We live in one of the prettiest places in the entire world. I think Western North Carolina is probably the second prettiest place in America. I think the only place that's prettier than it, and I shudder to say it, which is California. It's one of the prettiest states in our entire union. But you see what these liberal policies have done. I mean, they have destroyed one of the most beautiful and naturally gifted states in our entire union. And so when we see what's going on here in Asheville, and I don't group all of Buncombe County in with Asheville, but when we see what's going on here in Asheville, it truly worries me. I mean, it really does. And so I think that we need to, there's another commission that I would like to get started, which would analyze and study a lot of what's happened. If you guys look, it's right here actually. I believe on all of your seats you'll have a copy of the new contract with America. This is a synopsis. We have 53 policy objectives on it. But I want to create a study and an analysis that documents decades of failed progressive governance in our nation's inner cities. And I mean, when you look at it, this year, which we're only a few months into, we've had 24,000 homicides in our inner cities. 24,000. I mean, it is a terrible place to be. And this liberal governance are saying, oh, you're not going to have any of your rights. Taxes are going to go through the roof. Or we're going to defund law enforcement. We're going to take your ability to own a firearm away from you. I mean, it's really sad stuff, but I'll take one more question if we have any time.
Is there any push to take kids out of the government school system, like you put it, to reduce the amount of ideology they're pushing on our kids, to fund more conservative private schools?
Yeah, well, you know what? I will tell you, there is an association that all of our private schools are a part of. And I think they have over 170,000 institutions that are part of this association of people, and they pay their dues into it. And they provide, they'll help provide, principal placement if you need a new principal at your school, some teachers. They'll give you new education. But the Democrats, and again, you have to give it to them, they're always so Machiavellian, always so one step ahead. They have used this association now to start brainwashing our private school teachers. I mean, I was starting to see, I think in a live stream thing, and on the education committee, I look at a lot of the stuff. And I was watching a live stream. It was a Zoom thing where a teacher from this organization was trying to teach a bunch of private school teachers about sex ed. And then she was saying, oh, well, you know what? I realized halfway through this thing that I was teaching the 15-year-old sex education course to 8-year-olds. And it's just, silly me. But I figured, you know what? Well, we need to talk about it. We'll just keep pushing forward. And I'm telling you saw what happened to our lieutenant governor when he said, you know what? And this is a very simple thing. We should not have pornography in elementary schools. That's all he said. And they made it look like he was attacking trans people's ability to go to public schools. Or he was saying that no gay child should be educated. All these ridiculous things. All he's saying is we shouldn't have our children exposed to pornography. And I think that's something that most Americans can get behind. It's probably a 70-80% issue in the country. But you see, they're trying to usher in this sexual anarchy in our country, which is trying to destroy the nuclear family. Because they realize that the nuclear family is what makes our communities all so great. And so a part of our new contract with America is one that really focuses on culture and the family unit. Really any kind of policy that tries to take rights of the parents away to be able to govern and instruct and raise up their children. And really, I want to get back to an economy that is so strong where you can raise a family on a single income. Because, I mean, right now it's almost impossible to afford a house in Buncombe County or really anywhere in Western North Carolina without having two incomes. Right. And so then you're having to punt your children away to the government schools for so long, and then they got to do extracurricular activities, and then really the most time you're spending with them is while they're in bed asleep, and that's the only time they're in your house that you get to spend with them. And again, on that comment, I don't care if it's the mom or the dad who choose to go have that, but we need to be able to raise our children in peace and prosperity, and that is what we need to do. And nuclear families, I believe, is what is going to save this country, the family unit. But anyways, it's my honor to be your congressman. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
I just want to say thank